Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? The other day, I was reading a question in a tabletop role-playing games design group, and it was a question that I've seen or heard 1,000 times when people are either talking about designing an investigation type role-playing game or when you're the game master running a mystery. And that is, how do we make sure that the characters slash players actually solve the mystery? And every time I see that, I always ask myself, do they have to? Is it necessary? And the answer to this really depends upon your intention for the game and what you want the experience to be like. Now, we get a lot of messages from watching and reading the media regarding mysteries. Like, I can think of my own childhood watching Scooby-Doo and Captain Caveman, and yes, I'm dating myself horribly here, and, reading things like Sherlock Holmes and Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and heck, watching Agatha Christie mysteries, and even Inspector Clouseau and the Pink Panther, by the skin of his teeth, seem to solve the mystery. And so we get exposed to a lot of that idea that sooner or later, and maybe it's the clues are on or off camera, the protagonists, the main characters, which is kind of an important idea here, they solve the mystery. And they may or may not make things right. But what about the X-Files? There are other examples, although they're not quite as frequent, where people bump up against things and they never quite get it. They kind of miss it. They maybe kind of skim across it and never really seem to completely solve it. And the mystery remains mysterious. And sometimes that can be very satisfying as well. So a lot of it boils down to, what do you want out of that experience, or what's the goal of that experience? Very often, in these groups, they will talk about things like, what about clues and making sure there's enough clues, or the 3-clue rule, or throwing another clue in front of people if they're not getting it. And what about moving the story forward? And that's a very important statement. The story. Is there a story? Or do we look back and see what happened? Or is there something planned? Very often it's a little bit like the idea of the door problem. If there's a door that may or may not be opened, depending on how well the players roll, the characters, perform a skill, but they really need to get to the other side, just don't put the door there. But then you have to ask yourself the question, do they need to get to the other side? Why? Is there a story that's supposed to happen? Is there a game experience that's supposed to happen? In which case, I'm not going to give you the answer for how to move the story forward or make sure they solve the mystery, because that's generally not my intention when I play, is to have a certain thing happen. I prefer, and this is all bias and preference, but this is a thing that's very important to realize, because very often when these questions are being asked, the assumption, very often, by the participants is that, in fact, this is what is supposed to happen. The story is supposed to move forward. They are supposed to solve the mystery. This is how the players are going to be satisfied and happy, and this is the experience we want to make. That may work for a lot of people, and the nuances of how this happened are the important part. Just like in another type of game, the nuances on how we kill the big bad guy are important, but it's understood that we're the protagonist. This is going to happen, right? And I'm not belittling that. It's a legitimate game style. It's just not the reason I play. If you're playing for the experience of what it would be like to be this character in this situation, that includes the possibility of failing. Not just in a sense of, I'm going to try to win, and maybe I won't, and sometimes I've been parts of games, and this was very true in the past, where the game master would put puzzles and things in front of us, and it would be very much a challenge for the player, which is also legitimate. Not my favorite, but it's legitimate. But having the experience as the character, which means sometimes you don't solve it. Sometimes you don't open the door. Sometimes you don't solve the mystery. Sometimes that experience, having the experience of the character, that fails. Maybe they never even realized they didn't solve the mystery. Maybe they came away with completely different conclusions and were missing the boat entirely. That's still a legitimate form of game experience for me and for people that tend to like having I say the word experience a whole bunch of times, but having the experience of being that character in that place. And sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you. And it isn't always about combat and being killed, kill or be killed, and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you just quite don't get it at the end of the day, or you just kind of skim across it, and you're like, Mulder and Scully, and scratching your head. It's like, And sometimes that's a lot more satisfying than solving the mystery. Just brushing up against the weird, the disturbing, maybe even the mundane, and never thinking, yeah, I'm just not sure what happened. Sometimes that's the most compelling. Sometimes that makes you want to go back and play the game more or think about it. And the best thing is when the game master won't tell you and keeps it a secret. That keeps me wondering. Sometimes that's frustrating, yes, but that can be a lot of fun as well. So I can't answer the question they asked because it's not important to me. Is it important to you?